Imagine taking one step across a line no human eye can see. Nothing changes in the ground beneath your feet. The air is the same. The sunlight is the same. The trees do not move aside to announce that you have entered a new world. And yet, suddenly, you may be in another country. A passport can change your rights. A uniform can change your welcome. A fence, a checkpoint, or a single sentence in a law can decide whether you may stay, work, return, or be arrested. The line is invisible, but the consequences are real. Human beings have built walls, armies, flags, identities, and entire histories around boundaries that exist mostly in the human mind. Some people have even died defending a patch of land whose borders could not be seen from the ground. So why? Why would a species risk injury, hunger, and death over an imaginary line? The answer begins long before modern maps, passports, or nation-states. Before humans fought over countries, they were already protecting something older than a country itself. They were protecting territory. Territorial behavior did not begin with governments. Across the animal world, living things defend spaces that provide food, shelter, or a chance to reproduce. For humans, the pattern was more flexible and more complicated. A mobile group of hunter-fisher-gatherers might know a landscape intimately. They knew where water appeared during a dry season, where herds passed, where shellfish gathered, and where shelter could be found before a storm. They might avoid another group's usual route, exchange gifts, negotiate access, or sometimes fight when resources became scarce. But a moving range is not the same as a modern border. A home range can shift with the seasons. A political border is expected to remain fixed. It can be drawn on a map, marked by stones, remembered through stories, and defended even when the original reason for drawing it has faded. The impulse to protect useful space is much older than civilization. But early territorial behavior was not automatically peaceful, and it was not automatically war. The archaeological record is incomplete, and violence existed before farming. Mobile groups were usually smaller and more scattered than later settled populations, and moving away could sometimes be possible. Then, slowly, that possibility began to disappear. Imagine a group planting seeds in the soil. At first, the field is only dirt, but months later, it contains work. A season later, it contains food, and after years of returning to the same place, it contains memory. This is what changed when humans began farming, domesticating animals, storing food, and building more permanent settlements. Land was no longer simply somewhere you visited. It became somewhere you could not easily leave. A field represented planted labor and a future harvest. A house represented shelter. A storehouse represented survival through winter. A grave connected the living to ancestors. A village became not just a location, but a home. The ground beneath people's feet began to hold the past, the present, and the future all at once. And that made losing land much more dangerous. Across Neolithic Europe, farming communities grew, settled, and changed their social organization. Population increased, communities became more permanent, people had more to protect, but also more reasons to compete. The most valuable land was not equally available to everyone. Some groups could control better fields, water, herds, tools, or stored food. Social differences could become economic differences, and economic differences could become reasons for fear. Researchers cannot watch a Neolithic attack like a film. They have to reconstruct it from fragments. A skull with a healed fracture may tell us that someone survived an earlier blow. An arrowhead embedded in bone can reveal a projectile injury. A mass burial can show that many people died around the same time. Defensive structures may suggest that communities expected danger, although buildings can have more than one purpose. These clues are powerful, but not perfect. Not every broken bone was caused by an enemy, and many injuries never reached the skeleton. Archaeology can reveal what happened more easily than exactly why it happened. Still, patterns begin to emerge. A major bioarchaeological review of Neolithic northwestern Europe found that violence was widespread in the period, with some regional samples showing roughly 10% or more of individuals with evidence of cranial trauma. Mass violence sites could show much higher proportions. The authors connect larger-scale conflict in some settings with growing communities, competition for arable land, inequality, and increasing territoriality. This does not mean that every Neolithic village was a battlefield. It does not mean agriculture created all violence. It means that settled life created new conditions in which conflict could become more permanent, more organized, and more destructive. Near the end of the linear Bangarmic sequence in Central Europe, just before about 5000 calibrated BC, repeated mass violence sites suggest that some communities were wiped out in extreme episodes of killing. The exact causes remain debated, but the pattern is difficult to ignore. When people live closer together, depend on fixed fields, store valuable food, and begin to define themselves as separate communities, a dispute over resources can become a struggle over the survival of an entire group. And this is where the story takes a darker turn. Because people do not only say, "This field feeds us." They begin to say, "This is our field." Then, "This is our village." Then, "This is where our ancestors lived." The land has become part of the group's identity. Psychologists have demonstrated that group boundaries can influence behavior even when the original distinction is almost meaningless. In the famous tradition of Henri Tajfel's minimal group experiments, people can be assigned to an in-group and an out-group using arbitrary categories. They are then asked to distribute rewards between the two sides. The important lesson is not that a random label automatically creates war. It does not. The lesson is smaller and more unsettling. Humans can begin treating our side and their side as meaningful before the difference has any deep history. Once group identity becomes connected to land, ancestry, humiliation, religion, safety, or fear, the symbolic boundary can become emotionally stronger than a simple calculation of money or food. The line is no longer only outside the body. It is inside the mind. This helps explain why territorial conflicts can continue even after the original resource is almost forgotten. A piece of land may no longer be the only source of food. A border may no longer provide the best security, but the territory has become a homeland. And a homeland is not experienced as empty ground. It is experienced as proof that a people belongs somewhere. This is why two groups can both believe they are the rightful owners of the same place. Each side sees itself as the defender, not the invader. Each side may believe that giving up the land would mean surrendering history, dignity, safety, or the future. At that point, compromise can feel like betrayal, even when compromise would be materially rational. So did humans invent borders to prevent violence? Or did borders give old fears a permanent shape? The answer is both. A border can be useful. It can tell large numbers of strangers which rules apply, who is responsible for a road, where taxes are collected, how resources are managed, and where one authority ends and another begins. Shared boundaries can make cooperation across huge societies possible. But the same system that organizes cooperation can also divide people into insiders and outsiders. A line on a map can become a flag can become a story can become a duty, and a duty can send ordinary people toward extraordinary danger. We can see the cost of this transformation in the bones of ancient people. At the late Neolithic burial site of San Juan Antiportum Latinum in Western Europe, researchers re-examined the remains of 338 individuals. They identified 65 unhealed and 89 healed traumas consistent with aggression. Adolescent and adult males were especially affected, a pattern the researchers interpret as consistent with battle and raids. But even this number is probably an underestimate. An arrow can strike soft tissue and leave no mark on bone. A wound can kill without producing the kind of damage archaeologists can later identify. The skeletons show the violence, but not the whole violence. And that may be the most important point. Humans do not need to see a border to obey it, defend it, fear it, or die for it. They only need to believe that the border separates something worth protecting from something that threatens it. The strangest thing about a border is not that it is invisible. It is that millions of minds can make an invisible line feel more solid than the earth beneath it. A border is not simply natural. Rivers, mountains, and deserts can create obstacles, but a political boundary becomes real through shared belief and organized enforcement. It is recorded by institutions, taught to children, shown on maps, and defended by people who may never have chosen where it was placed. That makes borders socially constructed, but not imaginary. A socially constructed thing can still decide where you may live. It can determine which language is official, which law protects you, which army claims you, and whether another person sees you as a neighbor or a foreigner. Yet there is one final twist. If human beings can transform a line into a homeland, they can also transform a contested boundary into an agreement. The same imagination that creates us and them can create treaties, shared spaces, crossings, and rules for living beside people who are different. This does not make every territorial conflict simple. Resources, security, history, and power remain real. But the meaning people attach to territory can intensify conflict, and meanings can sometimes change. So why did humans start fighting over invisible borders? Not because the lines themselves were magical. They started by defending places that sustained life. Then they attached labor, memory, ancestry, identity, and destiny to those places. Over time, the physical territory became wrapped in invisible meanings. And once a group believed that the land was part of who they were, an attack on the land could feel like an attack on the people themselves. We do not fight over lines. We fight over what we believe the lines mean. And perhaps the most human thing about borders is this. They are made by imagination, but they reveal what people are willing to protect, what they are willing to fear, and what they are willing to sacrifice for a place they call home.